If you would, please pray with me. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in us the fire of your love, and send forth your Spirit, and we shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. All right, friends, strap in. The espresso's hitting. I love being a priest. I love being a priest more than I could ever explain to you. I love being a priest. This past week, I had the opportunity to spend an entire week with about 300 high schoolers, which most of you would be like, Father, that is the literal worst thing that could ever happen to me. But here's the thing, I didn't have to chaperone it. So, I loved it though. I loved it because I had an opportunity to journey with these teenagers in a way that they were not ready for, I assure you. But before I get into that, I want to just spend a moment here on the gospel, and then I want to relate it to why I brought that up in the first place. So as I was praying over the gospel after being exhausted, I started to laugh and chuckle because for once in my life, I kind of understood two things. As I was reading this gospel and Jesus is trying to, just teach this group of people, somebody's coming up to him being like, Jesus, we need you over here. Jesus, we need you over here. And he's probably having a hard time catching his breath. Because at every moment, somebody's coming up to him asking him for something. So for the first time in my life, I understood that very uniquely. Because while I was at this camp, I couldn't walk 20 feet without somebody being like, Father, can I talk to you? Father, can I talk to you? Father, can I talk to you? Being like, okay, I don't have enough oxygen for this, but let's go. And then the second thing I learned very, very uniquely was moms, I'm so sorry, but I understand what it means when you hear mommy, mom, 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 all the time. I love being a priest. Here is the stage for the gospel today. So here is Jesus teaching the crowds, and all of a sudden, out of the crowds comes Jairus. Jairus, who is in distress because his daughter is ill, and he knows that she might die. So he speaks out from the crowd, Jesus, teacher, come to my house. My daughter is in need of you and healing. Come and help me. From out of the crowd, Jairus steps forward and asks the teacher, come and do something because I've done all I can. Out of a sense of helplessness, he comes and asks the Lord. Now imagine this for another minute. Here is Jesus saying, Jairus, I will come and I will help you. And on his way, more and more people are pressing in, asking the Lord for things, asking the Lord for help, giving their very hearts and their very selves. Jesus, do something in my life too. And out of this other crowd is a woman who has been dealing with something time and time again, over and over and over again, seeking out as much help as she can get, only to be left in despair. Because nothing that she does will help her. Added on top of this, the thing of the time, she would have been also ritually unclean. She would have been an outcast from her society, from her friends. Because if you interacted with her in her uncleanliness, you too would become unclean. So here's a woman not only dealing with medical issues and difficulties, but she's dealing with personal issues. She's dealing with friend issues. She's dealing with societal issues. But out of the crowd, as Jesus is walking by, she says to herself, if I can only touch the tassels of his cloak. This would have been very dangerous for her. Because by her doing that, by her touching anything, that thing itself would become unclean. So here she hears about this holy man, this holy healer, and she thinks to herself, maybe I too can be healed. So what does she do? In the midst of all of this crowd, she reaches out, touches his cloak, and is healed. But the story doesn't end there. You see, in her littleness, she didn't want to be seen. Because to be seen would be to be found out. To be seen would mean that others would look at her with disdain. To be seen would mean that she would have to come face to face with her own uncleanliness. But something within her stirred. And so she reached out, and Jesus himself noticed. And now there's two ways to interpret this. One, Jesus in his humanity, with all the people around him, yeah, he was probably like, who touched me? I have a feeling he was doing this thing where like a little kid pulls on you and you're just like, oh my gosh, I almost fell. But in his divinity, he definitely knew who it was. And now imagine this for a moment. What if Jesus knew who it was that reached out to him asking for his help, but didn't point her out? Knew exactly what she needed, knew exactly what she wanted, but simply asked the question, who did this? It's almost as if Jesus wanted this woman to step out into the light, to be seen for who she is, not what she struggles with. To be seen for the daughter that she is, not for the unclean person that society had made her out to be. Maybe perhaps Jesus asked the question, hoping that she would have the courage to step forward, rather than simply remain in her littleness and her hiddenness. So he asks the question, who did this? And imagine for her for a moment, in her fear, in the crowd, if I step out, what will happen? But something stirs within her again, and she says, it was me. And Jesus, rather than a stern look that maybe some of the scribes and Pharisees would have given, instead gives a smile. And for the first time in her littleness, hiddenness, and despair, she was seen. She was known. Why does this matter? Friends, I had the opportunity to be with a bunch of teenagers. And the thing I love about youth ministry is the little kids have very little filter from here to here, right? They say some of the darndest things. Teenagers have very little filter from here to here. The problem is, and I don't know how many of you made it through your teenage years. Most of us spend our lives trying to repair the damage we caused. Some of you are going to be approaching your teenage years. But the thing that we all have a tendency to do is encase this heart that we've been given in concrete, because we're terrified of being seen. We're terrified of being known. We're terrified because we know what we are, or at least what we perceive ourselves to be. So this week, I had the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with so many teens who for the first time went to confession, for the first time brought into the very light things that they have been struggling with. My friends, my heart was so moved that one of the nights of this whole camp, and these were kids that were just coming into high school and those that have just been graduated. These are not your normal Jesus kids. Let me just put that out there. These were everyday teenagers going through life, maybe invited by a friend to come experience what life could be like on this retreat, on this camp. And it culminated in a mass, in a candlelit mass on Thursday night. And me being me, I decided to change it up and change everything that they had planned. Because the Lord moved something fierce in my heart. And so at the beginning of this mass, everybody in the chapel had a little electric candle because teenagers were bound to burn the place down. They had this little electric candle, and this entire chapel was filled with candlelight. It was filled with light that was illuminated by every single person that was in attendance. And during the homily, I asked them to do me a favor. I wanted them to turn off all of the light. I plunged the church into darkness because I wanted them to understand something. That without the light that each one of you bring, this church remains dark. And the light that we all possess comes very directly from that tabernacle candle. The light of Jesus illuminated on the Easter Vigil coming into the church to be spread to each and every one of you. But then I asked them if they would be willing to go a little deeper with me. I want to offer this to you because Jesus stops at nothing to get to our littleness, to our hiddenness, to ask us to step into the light so that he can do something about it. And so I asked them with their lights off, not to worry about who was around them. And I said, how many of you have ever struggled with your place in this life? How many of you have ever wondered if you are enough? How many of you have ever felt unlovable? How many of you have ever felt despair because you wonder if you even matter? How many of you have ever wondered if this place would be different without you? How many of you have been terrified of the things that you've done? How many of you feel unforgivable? How many of you feel alone? And I let them sit with it for a minute. And then with their eyes closed, I asked them in courage. And I want you to take a moment with what I just said to think about it yourself. I asked them, if you have the courage to step into the light, to acknowledge that reality, I want you to turn your candle on. And all of a sudden, a dark church became illuminated. It became illuminated because all of a sudden, everybody realized that they're not the only one questioning these things. They're not the only one who goes through struggles. They're not the only one who feels this way at times. But it was made real because all of a sudden, they could look around and see that they're not alone. It ended with an offering, a procession during the offertory of bringing that candle, that very offering. Lord, this is me in my littleness. This is me in my fear. This is me in my despair. This is me in my hopelessness. And I'm asking you to do something about it. And they brought their little candle to the altar. And that mass finished with an altar full of these little lights illuminating the church. Your light illuminating the church. What you bring to this altar, those gifts of triumph, those gifts of joy, those gifts of fear, what do you bring? Just like the woman who reached out to touch the Lord and say, help me. And I want to end with this. We hear in another part of this story, Jesus finally makes his way to Jairus' house. And he walks in, and the little girl has already died. And what does Jesus say? He says, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. This would have been imagine Jairus at the moment. Lord, what do you mean she's sleeping? My daughter has just died. Why would you say that? To the Lord, everything is in right perception and perspective. He doesn't say that to elicit some sort of joke or elicit some sort of just awful meaning. He says it to Jairus so that he might have hope. God doesn't play games with your offering. He doesn't play games with your heart. He doesn't play games with your fears. He doesn't play games with your despairs. He doesn't play games with your desires. He takes them and he makes something of them. And so what does Jesus do? And he says, Talitha cum, little girl, arise. Jesus cares about what you ask for. He may not answer it in the way that you intend or the way that you want, but that doesn't mean he doesn't care about what you ask for. Talitha cum, little girl, arise. You are his son and daughter. What do you bring to him? What do you ask of him? What do you offer to him? Because sometimes we can offer the good things in our lives, absolutely. But if we're being honest, a lot of times we need to offer the things we're struggling with. So this morning, to offer that thing as this altar is being prepared, ask the Lord, come into the light, reach out in faith, and you too might receive that healing.